Okay, so first, let's thank everybody for their presentation.
Well done.
I actually participated in this last year, and right before you go on to speak, I felt like this, terrible anxiety. And so I really do appreciate the fact that everybody is willing to do this. And I also think it's a way that we, in a way, are practicing the entrepreneurial mindset because we're challenging ourselves to do some new things. So I was really excited about your mentoring project with your teams, and so I loved your analogy of the coach and the assistant coaches. So how do you interact with the mentors as the project's going on? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're actually very hands-off. For the program I described to be operating at scale, we can't necessarily be, I don't know, this is probably a bad term to use, but micromanaging of the mentors. We really have to just kind of roll the dice in some cases and cross our fingers and hope that the outcomes are positive. And surprisingly, we get very, very few kind of angry emails or bad reviews from students. And when those do come up where there is some sort of issue, we certainly intervene. But as I mentioned in my talk, most of the mentoring happens off-site. Logistically, you might imagine that, I don't know how it is on your campus, but parking at the university is always a challenge. So oftentimes we encourage our mentors to actually stay away from campus and meet students where they are.
Okay. So now, does someone have a question that they would like to ask about the mentoring program? You might need to sort of wave your hand if do you see anybody?
No, nobody cares.
Okay, so I think we want to talk about Klingons.
The Klingons,
Yes.
that's right.
And I was so excited when I was hoping you might give us one of the, the battle cries or do some of the things like that. So you were saying that one of the important things was for administrators to understand about when you have two faculty members in the classroom. So how do you divide the load? How do you coordinate things?
Well, it turned out that liberal arts are glad to teach overloads. So what we do is we created the engineering courses and we hire faculty as adjuncts. And, don't tell anybody, but so far nobody has complained about it. I mean, it's really not that expensive in the large scheme of things. But yeah, once you get to union issues of double counting or who's counting what, it becomes a problem. So we just make it very clear. You're just teaching a course, you're getting paid for it.
And so this is part of like your full-time load as an engineering faculty member, and then the humanities person takes an overload and gets paid for it.
Yes.
Okay.
It's an engineering course that allows us to control the content, controls the quality. We don't lose control of it, and basically you get the best of both worlds.
So now I do have a question in thinking about the Klingon. Are there ever any tense moments in class?
You mean going Klingon on each other? We have a course where it's the philosophy. It's an ethics course, and an engineering person and a philosophy person, and it's not me, and that gets tense once in a while. They tend to go at each other. But in my case, the issue here is that I really respect the point of view of the liberal arts faculty, right? So this is not an adversarial relationship, and if it becomes one, it just fails, I think. So I'm a closet liberal arts guy, just masquerading with this.
Okay, it's coming out now.
Yeah.
I do know that sometimes in the liberal arts, the perception or the way that they approach problem solving is different.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I struggle a little bit when we do some co-teaching with liberal arts, and so I find that I have to struggle just a little bit to understand their perspective.
Yes, yes. But ultimately, I'm there for an hour, and I can tough it out if I feel it's making a difference in the students' lives, and it is. You know, so yeah, it's not very comfortable. A lot of times, you know, you're speaking Klingon and they're speaking another language, but ultimately the students really appreciate it. So it's been okay.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you about teaming, and I loved your story. Suppose that you could only give one piece of advice to us about how to enable teams. What would you give us? Where would you tell us to start?
Well, I think the place to start, and Samantha's doing this at Wichita State with the freshman engineering, which has been redesigned into a project course. And what she's done is the first step. So following the 3 C's, the first step is curiosity. And she's made actually observation of the team dynamics an assignment to the class. At the beginning of the class, they know that's something they're asked to observe. And through the class, they can log and they can identify that. It's not a formal part of the grade, but it triggers that curiosity. Now, what we haven't done yet is gone to the second stage of sharing. And we're a little nervous about that because feedback in a lot of cases, and this is part of a problem, and it's part of the problem I mentioned that I had as a manager, was my feedback was advice. It was actually the prescription of what to do about something. And for the control systems people, you know that feedback is not that. Feedback is the signal back from what happened. And if you try to prescribe the solution before you've collected all of the observations of what's happening, you're going to have a bad problem. And unfortunately, feedback has often come to mean giving advice on how I would have done it or changing the way to do it. And so we think we've first got to get that observation established so that students will actually, or participants actually, not just students, us can actually be participants in this process as well, can begin the proper problem-solving mechanism, the proper control system mechanism, if you will, of fully understanding the context before offering up solutions. And in fact, it's really not offering up solutions, it's collaborating on what might we do about that. But if you start that process with feedback that's, you should do this, you know, out of context, not real time, we think we'll have problems. But what we think we can do then is progress through that. The other thing I want to say that I couldn't fit in was that there's a combination of capability building here. So it's this process that I talked about doesn't mean that you dismiss what you're already doing. The instruction on what constitutes good teaming, what are good practices, is all very relevant. There's a lot of good stuff out there. So the knowledge of how to team can be taught. The capability to actually do that work is the iterative process that Curtis talked about this morning in terms of rapid learning, and rapid learning happens when you get a lot of rapid feedback. So don't stop doing what you're doing in terms of instruction to build the foundation, but realize that's just the starting point. And if you can get the students to observe, we think then actually the next steps will come fairly naturally. So the advice I'd give is keep doing what you're doing, but get students to start observing to trigger that curiosity.
And so have you seen like any of the student observations? Because I know sometimes when I have a team that comes to me and like they're self-destructing, okay?
Yeah.
And what members are perceiving are totally different. They're looking at the exact same situation and perceiving it 180 degrees out of phase.
Yeah. Well, so there's some great tools there. The 5 dysfunctions of teams has done very well with that. And the interesting thing is that I think as Samantha and Chris and others have applied those, letting the teams run into some of those walls is the curiosity part. They may not be receptive to the instruction until they've actually done it and found out that they had a problem. And that's where we think as we tune up those observation things, we'll take some of the noise out of that process. Because what happens is when they're seeing it from different perspectives, they're often proposing a solution from that perspective. So they aren't actually sharing an observation, they're actually trying to advocate for their position. And if we can back that up to where they share the observation, then we're on a more consistent problem-solving track.
So I really liked how you noticed the thread among all the talks was like relationships. And I think probably, David, yours is the most powerful relationship story that we heard today. How did you get buy-in from people on campus to hold this event? And
Well, the faculty and the students who knew Matt, I mean, that was the low-hanging fruit. And they're the ones who really put it together. There are people in my department who worked closely with Matt. Nadia Shalamova ran the technical communication degree program that Matt got his degree from. And she was the one who sent me the email. And she was the one who was always there helping make these decisions and make it actually happen. But she doesn't like to be upfront all of the time, so sometimes I had to take that on, which was a challenge. And then the other challenge, I think, is just helping people who don't know Matt and don't understand what a contributor he was, so that they can really understand that sense of what he brought to our campus. And I think that's why it's important to keep doing the ride and try to find venues where we can share his story, venues such as this.
so I think as I was listening to you talk, first off, I thought of my students that I had close relationships with. I think we all have a Matt somewhere in our life that means a lot to us. But then I went even beyond it, and I thought, if I were a new student coming to Milwaukee, I think it would really touch me to see how the faculty really did want to have a relationship with students, and how they remembered what he did, and how it was even possible for a student to have that kind of impact on a school. I think that would be like a very, very powerful thing.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, it humanizes the educational process. It's one thing I love about Keene. I think it really enables us to go way beyond skill set, this whole mindset thing. I mean, there's so much emotion in my mindset, and I think that serves as a vehicle for connecting into the emotions of the students when they're learning. I mean, it's a lot of cognitive psychology. If you can find the bridge between a student's emotional connection to what it is that they're learning about in the classroom, it's much more likely to make its way into long-term memory. So I think an event like this bike ride helps us navigate our way through those emotions.
Okay, we want to open it up. I'm sure that in the audience you have some questions or even just some comments that you would like to make. I may even start calling on people.
So I have a question about the mentorship program. So the school I teach at, Ohio Northern, we're in kind of the middle of cornfields and soybean fields and have 3,000 people in town, so we don't have a huge pool of resources to pull from. Do you see that type of a model working if we used upperclassmen instead of professionals in the city?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I briefly mentioned, we experimented with all sorts of kind of different classifications of mentoring pools, one of them being peers. So we actually run in cooperation with Keene, an entrepreneurial catalyst mentoring program. So we haven't seen the level of student outcomes when you are leveraging undergrads or even graduates to kind of come alongside the project-based or venture-based teams. But in a pinch, I would say it's doable. If I were in that position, and I grew up in Cleveland, so I know your pain out in between Toledo or Detroit, wherever you guys are in which cornfield. But I actually got this comment yesterday where somebody was saying, yeah, there's no way this would work at my institution because we're our ecosystem of qualified mentors is nil. So another thing I would say to the audience is, I use the term Socratic, and really all that boils down to is asking, very common sense questions to get the teams thinking outside of their own basically boardroom mentality. So you could actually make the argument, you could go into the community center, down the street from your university, bring in some folks that have life experience, not necessarily industry or engineering or entrepreneurial experience, and their sole objective is to ask why to these assigned teams 5 times. And there's plenty written on this. If you're a fan of, lean manufacturing, this was Toyota's playbook, dating back to the 70s. If you can ask why 5 times in a row, you're going to get that project-based team really going in a totally different direction than they came into the meeting with. So my response to you in short would be lower your expectations or qualification list of what you think you need as a legit mentor. Sometimes I'll tell my colleagues, do they have a pulse? That's how we ended up with that spreadsheet of 300 mentors, because basically our barrier of entry to work with our teams was very low, because we were just looking for more people to provide that kind of hands-on feedback as frequently as we possibly could get it.
You looked like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, a couple thoughts on that. I think it's really important to understand the role of the mentor and what they can do. And there's a big difference between a mentor and somebody who's giving advice. And so asking the questions is the way to not be giving advice, but be forcing the students to think through and expose the issues. The mentors, a lot of times, I've done a lot of work in the Midwest, and the problem with mentors, including me, is that we tend to give advice about how we would have done it. And that's not really mentoring. And so finding people who will do that. Then the other thing I'd comment on is that mentoring on providing knowledge and insight that the students don't have access to. So back to the Hannah and Larissa thing. They solicited their own mentors. They got help from everywhere they could. They were very good at that. It was one of their strengths. But that outside help couldn't do what they needed to do with each other. So where the peer mentoring is really powerful is where they're real time in the project, where they're seeing what's going on, and they're iterating rapidly on that. So it's an agile process of development based on very rapid feedback. And students can do that. What they can't do is provide the life experience that can oftentimes ask questions, the penetrating questions that will expose the issues.
So I was going to say, I'm from Terre Haute, and I'm sort of like in the same situation you are, is that not a lot of people retire to Terre Haute, Indiana.
I don't know why.
But one of the things we were thinking about trying, because we have a lot of alums who really want to interact with the school and who are interested, is doing it over Skype and just having the interaction. We're just now trying that out, so I don't have any results yet, but I'm hopeful that that might be something that we could do, that would work out. Does anybody else have a mentoring program that they want to tell us about or comment on? Okay, I thought I saw a hand back there. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I had a follow-up question on his question, basically. Is even though there are 3,000 only habitants in the area, I'm sure that the university has graduated more than 3,000 people over so many years. With Skype and all of these gadgets now, solutions available, is it possible that, or is it effective enough to have a mentoring or even advising program for lower, let's say, newer students, engineering students, have mentors that are e-mentors, let's call them?
Short answer, I would say yes. It's better than no mentoring at all. In my experience, the mentors who want to engage with our students, just like many of our faculty, want to engage in person first and foremost. And if you're able to dole out the team assignments in such a way that each mentor got perhaps 4 teams to mentor in person and then 2 online. That might be a really nice way to kind of ease into it. But I mentioned this in my talk. We started our model for this program with a global mindset from day one, which basically, it forced us to put the syllabus and the whole program essentially online. But at the present moment, upwards of 90% of our participants, both on the mentee and the mentoring side, are all in person. But you're absolutely right. I think that's the direction life is going. And so good idea. Yeah.
Maybe you get a mentor from Japan and get a totally different point of view on it.
I can comment. I'm Kimberly Foster. I'm Dean of Science and Engineering at Tulane. And we have a Novel Tech Challenge program, which is a year-long innovation competition program. And we use a lot of mentors over Skype and other long-distance means. We utilize our my technical advisor, executive advisory board, and we use alumni who want to be engaged. And we've had a lot of success doing that. We have both on-the-ground mentors, but we have a lot of Skype mentors. And especially in things that New Orleans area doesn't have a lot of people in, like intellectual property law and some of these other things, we can take our alumni who work in big offices in New York City, and it really broadens the student's experience. So I think a combination of mentors on the ground, like you were saying, on the ground, and using the global network can really work well.
That's great.
Just following up on that, on the mentoring, do you have any sort of training or guidelines, or do you have an assessment that comes back from the students to X, the ones that actually aren't doing so well? Kind of following up what John was saying, there's a delicate balance between hands-off or getting involved and taking over, and that's my problem I've always found with faculty as well as mentors, trying to get that balance.
Yeah, John, maybe you can chime in on this too. I'm happy to follow up.
I need a translator for Gary. Could you repeat, Gary?
So really it's more about, do you have something with your mentoring program? Do you give them guidelines to your mentors? Do you say, this is what you do? And do you have an assessment that comes back from students to say, this guy just wasn't on par, and you strike him off your list?
So yeah, absolutely on both fronts. I mean, so the guidelines, the training were really developed in real time as we piloted this program. So essentially, every question we were getting from the mentors, and this goes back to your original question, how do you so we have a really tight relationship with most of these 50 mentors plus that we now have. I mean, we're on a first name basis with pretty much everybody. But essentially, as we were scaling this up, every question we got from the mentors, we put into a Q&A document, and then the Q&A document fueled our, we would do in-person and video recorded trainings on mentoring best practices. And I should say this is all essentially stolen from Techstars and Y Combinator, and as we mentioned, with these global hackathons that are springing up. The key is mentorship, because I think the point I want to reinforce here, when we're talking about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial mindset and some of the things we've heard at this conference about moving from mindset to action, every one of these, everybody agrees it's got to be a multidisciplinary team with diverse backgrounds. These are the tenets of design thinking and the engineering design process. Everybody's working on something different. So for all of these teams to get the guidance they need, I'm absolutely convinced mentors are a key ingredient, right? So you've got to get the mentoring model right, or else you're not going to be able to kind of sustain this. So long story short, the training is done. You're gonna know what the pitfalls are once you start standing up a model like this. And then assessment is the same thing. It's really, again, reinforcing the business model of how this works within a university. We take the exact same assessment we use for our faculty, like Nassif, off the shelf, and we give it to the students and the mentors. And we have the exact same cadence of evaluation. So everything is lockstep, the same way it would be for a standard FA already on your payroll.
So you have a frequently asked questions thing for your mentors where you put it up and they can look at it?
Yep, so part of the playbook that I'm advertising.
Oh, the playbook,
It's
okay.
normally $19.95, but for you all, it's free.
Is it on a card?
It is on a card, actually.
Okay.
Yes, you can get the playbook for free on a card, and it's got essentially the job description has a whole, I think it's 4 pages long of FAQs that essentially then influence the training.
And so Tulane, if you would add what you did to his card, that would be really, really cool. And then Ohio Northern, once you decide what you're going to try, add how it came out. I'll add how ours came out.
Yeah, John, did you want to add to that reinstatement?
The one thing I'd add, I think, is that it's back to what Curtis talked about this morning, which is this rapid iteration of teams presenting to each other, which I think is a really powerful concept, and that can include mentors or not. I taught a Lean Launchpad course on site at Missouri S&T, and it was the first time course, and we didn't have any mentors. It's in Rolla, so it's far away from anything. So what we ended up doing was having the students comment on each other's presentations before I and the other instructor presented, and it was remarkable how many of the key points got hit by the team's feedback to each other. And what Curtis talked about in terms of this one's better on that, and the other one's better on the other it's a powerful learning mechanism. So, and that can be done then what Bonnie, the professor I was working with on that one, and I did, after all the team feedback was going on, then we could summarize what was the key point underneath that feedback, because most of the key points had been hit. So that's a pretty powerful combination. So I thought the way Curtis did that at SRI was a pretty powerful way to extend and leverage the mentors. So if you got mentors sitting in on that process, like you're saying through Skype or so on, that's easy to do, and then they can add sort of color commentary or wrap things up at the end that encapsulates the learning that can be taken away from that. So another way to extend the leverage of the team.
It's a really good point. Yeah, and bringing up Curtis, he introduced a model that was essentially a standardization framework that, would homogenize to a certain extent the team presentation. So to the training point, that we do the exact same thing within our syllabus. We have a standard starting point template for all the teams and all the mentors to lean on if they don't want to use their own version of business model canvas or, an investor executive summary, whatever it is that they want to do. Great question, thank you. Any questions for the Klingon?
Yeah, no Klingon words. I don't know any of them. So. Although there are people who can speak the language, apparently. I'm not that much of a geek.
Not fluent.
No. Makes a good story, though.
So you were saying, I have a question for you because
Are you a Star Trek fan?
Pardon?
Are you a Star Trek fan?
Oh, I'm absolutely a Star Trek fan. Live long and prosper.
See, I can't do that. I'm sorry, I interrupted your question.
All Star Treks, by the way.
Yeah.
So, my question is, when you were working with the faculty from humanities in terms of working together to develop the course, how did you work together? Can you describe that process at all?
Yeah, so, I subscribe to the mantra, never let a good crisis go to waste. So we had the core curriculum get redone, and all of a sudden, our 4-year program was going to become maybe 5.5 years if you have to have every outcome be met by a single course. So we were all really intensely focused on how do we make this work, and that helped really drop the cyber walls a little down, because it was really an existential thing, right? There's no way we're going to have a 4.5 or a 5-year-old engineering program, a 5-year-long engineering program, and it took us, the biggest battle was really getting the liberal arts to understand that this is not a game. This is really important, and we need to work together. Once that threshold was crossed, remarkably, these are nice people that you can actually have conversations with. and work well together. But it took a while to get, the initial part was hard. Once I decide to work with somebody, it's very strong commitment, good faith effort, and that translates. I mean, really, we have engineering faculty members who cannot work with liberal arts. You know, they confuse intelligence, technical intelligence with wisdom, and that's really not a very good starting point. So you just have to respect these people. I mean, I don't know how well to put it.
How did you recruit the faculty to work with you? Like, did you go knock on doors or?
Yeah. So reaching out and seeing, there was a lot of false starts where, you say, let's go have lunch, and it's like a first date, 2/3 through the lunch meeting, you're saying, what is an earthquake when you need one, because this is just not going well. And then eventually, you find somebody you can work with, and you agree to put a proposal together, and it goes through the core curriculum committee, and you're teaching courses. Intentions, I think, is very important, right? You have to come across as a genuine player that is not going to play games, is not going to take credit for when credit is, and compensate them for their work.
So
it's a very boring story.
I know sometimes at some institutions that there's a lot of tension between, is this an engineering course or is this a liberal arts course, and who gets credit for it, and an engineer can't teach a liberal arts course because we need to have the liberal arts faculty do it. Did you have any of those kinds of tensions?
This is why, by making sure, I would not give control of the courses, because we had this thing where you have a liberal arts teaching engineering course, and the first offering is great, then an instructor change, and then by the third instructor, they're making wicker baskets, and it's like, well, this is not really what we signed up for. So these are engineering courses that are assessed through engineering ABET, and the liberal arts are coming in as instructors, consultants, and stakeholders. So it's an engineering program. Can't do it other ways, because like I said, you hit it off with somebody, they do a great job, and then they move on, and another instructor comes in, and the idea of learning, I don't know about other schools, but in our school, the idea of learning outcomes and staying true to them and assessing them properly doesn't play very well with all the liberal arts. There are some of them who just think that going to a class and pontificating for an hour is education, and that's not really, I don't subscribe to that.
Well, they don't have ABET either.
Are these project courses?
Yeah. Even when they're not, I make them one. Yeah, there's no sense in me just talking. They have to do something. So the professional practice course, I make them redesign the donut eating experience. It's a design thinking project. And they get donuts twice in the semester. They're happy as clams. But they have to observe people eating donuts and come up with a better way of eating donuts. And
I want to take that course.
They really have a hard time because they're these are all third and fourth year students, and they're having a hard time figuring out how to improve the eating donut experience. And I start asking them about you can solve like fourth order complex differential equations, because this is just donuts. So it serves them very well to see that this is not engineering is everywhere, and the psychology professor does a great job kind of feeding into that.
So do you have any examples of better eating of donuts? Yes,
actually.
Tell us one.
Well, when they're looking at people eating donuts, right? And this is what I ask them to do. It's like you have to look at somebody eating donuts like you've never seen a human, you've never seen a donut. And, there are some people come in, they try to break the donut, it falls crumbs onto the table, they're embarrassed. And so they have ways to create a donut that has like perforated easy to break off, and they have to make a prototype. So they, with donuts is easy because you can you can actually get the recipe and bake them yourself. There was groups that actually made the donuts on a skewer. So when you put the gooey stuff on it, when you take them off, there are places where it's clean and you can grab it and not have sticky fingers. So it's just a fun exercise. But like I said, even when it's not a project, it becomes a project when I'm done with it.
I bet they love the usability studies, right?
You got to keep trying and trying until you get it right.
Yeah. Well, you don't become like me if you don't like food. So.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I see one at the back.
Well, we don't call them donuts, we call them edible toroids. If you're coming from,
I got you.
Yeah, Klingons are coming from coneheads or something. But no, just along that, my comment is, I'm by the Mohsen Saraf from University of New Haven. And one of the courses that I've been taking care of past couple of years is senior design, basically this. And at least every semester, every year, I come across a group of students who take on very challenging projects. They do an excellent job, to the point that one of them now has communicated with a multi-billion-dollar company and they're supporting them. But when it comes time to writing, it's like an 8-year-old is writing a project. And that's part of the liberal arts part that's lacking in the seniors. And I think that's a very good point. It has to be emphasized. And it's like some parts of the muscles that hasn't been exercised enough.
It's based on feedback, yeah. I mean, the issue here, you just start them early. So the course I teach with Professor McCall is a freshman design course. And we've basically folded the technical writing in this course. And I mean, number one, the quality and kind of feedback that you can give, just like off the cuff, ready to go, it will take me hours, and you have to lock me in a dungeon to be able to give them half of the quality. So, I think when they're taking engineering courses and we're giving them feedback, if you have the same report and you see the kind of feedback that you would give them and the kind of feedback that an English instructor gives them, it's very, very different.
Yes.
So I think if you can get, and the problem here is that when they're writing technical, we had a technical writing course and the students hated it because it didn't have any context, right? It was assignments, they did it, it didn't mean anything, they got the feedback, they probably never looked at it, but when it became their project, that interaction was very, very, very valuable. And I mean, we haven't seen the results yet because that group that started in the freshman year, now they're seniors. So we'll see how it goes at the end of this year. But I have a feeling it's transformational.
Good.
First off, we want to thank everybody for coming, and particularly the panel for their presentations. We thank you so much for being so open and sharing, some really personal things with us. So thank you very much. Let's give them a hand.